This monster is a Craftsman trimmer that belongs to a good friend of mine, and it's the definition of being overpowered. With a massive 32 cc's of displacement, it's better suited to take down tall weeds in a pasture versus being used on a small city lot. However, they haven't used it in quite some time and need to get it working again because they just moved into a new home. But to be honest, I really wish I would have said no to this one. In today's video, we look at this Craftsman trimmer, and the problem is that it hasn't been used in quite some time, and it's also got an issue with the pull rope. The only problem is that I thought this was going to be an easy fix, but as you'll see here in a bit, it was everything but that. Now, I'm going to try and repair this trimmer. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, we're only going to mention what these other options could be. We don't have enough time to look into them, but if you need more information on these options, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you need to. The first thing I want to do is look over the trimmer and see if I can find anything obviously wrong with it, but it's all there with hardly any damage to it. The only real thing I can see is the rope hanging from the cover, and it's quite dirty. I do want to pull on the rope and see if it will still work, and if it does, it means the spring is still intact. Now, the only issue is with the Incredipull system on this trimmer. You got to pull the rope almost all the way out to get the spring-loaded system to work, but with the majority of the rope hanging out of the cover, it's really hard to tell if the recoil is still working. However, I did get it to kind of work, which means the spring is still intact, and we'll need to take it apart to inspect it. Now, because I'm filming this repair, I need to clean the trimmer to try to keep my hands from being dirty so it's not so distracting. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out well, as you'll see later on. So before I start taking this thing apart, I'm going to do a quick cleaning on it. I'm not sure why there's an oil film all over the plastics on this trimmer, but cleaning it shouldn't take too much time. I'm also going to clean the trimmer head and the guard while I'm at it. Now, this is not necessary, but it's not a really tough job to do, and after a good rinse, it looks a whole lot better with very little effort. Besides that, I don't mind doing it at all, and because I've known this person for almost 20 years, it's the least I can do. Now, if I wasn't going to film this repair and I didn't know them personally, or to be frank, if I really didn't have any intentions on being friends with them, I wouldn't even bother cleaning it. The only problem is that later on things get very oily and I'm going to have a hard time keeping my hands clean, so I do apologize if it becomes a distraction. Now, the recoil assembly is part of this larger piece that covers the engine, but to get to it, I've got to take the trimmer down to the bare engine, which is not going to be fun, and in fact, this is going to be a fairly tough job. The first thing I need to do is take off the rear handle from the shaft. Now, looking back at the video, I think I could have gotten away without doing this, but at the time, I wanted all the room I could get to make filming a lot easier. To be honest, taking off the handle really isn't that tough a job at all. I also probably didn't need to take the shaft out of the front of the engine, and that's because I'll take this part off pretty soon. But like I said, I wanted to take everything off, and doing it systematically made perfect sense to me. Most of the screws are the same, but you'll need to keep them organized because some will screw into plastic while others will go into metal, which means they'll have different threads. With the front of the engine off, we can see the clutch drum, but when I was inspecting it, I realized that the bolt that attaches it to the crankshaft was loose and barely hanging on by a thread, so it's a good thing we're doing this repair then. As you can see, I didn't even need to use a driver handle to loosen the bolt for the drum. That's how loose it was. Now, to remove the engine cover, we unfortunately need to take the clutch assembly off, which is the hard part. The reason is because we need to keep the engine from turning while trying to remove the clutch, because it simply threads onto the crankshaft. To do that, I'm going to remove the spark plug and put a large piece of rope into the engine. This will keep the engine from spinning once we start to turn the clutch. Now, I don't have the special tool to remove it, so to make it easier, I'm going to remove the outer part of the assembly. That way we can turn the inner part with a large adjustable wrench. If you know of a better way to do it, then by all means use it. After removing the inner part of the clutch, a large washer, and a metal sleeve, we can finally remove the fasteners that hold the cover to the engine. Now, for some reason, these required a really long reach driver bit to get to them. Once the fasteners have been removed, I tried to pull the cover away from the engine, except there was a wire loom that was in the way. Once the loom was out of the way, I tried to remove the cover once again, and I soon realized I had another issue. There seems to be yet another cable on the opposite side that I've never seen before, and it wasn't the throttle cable. To find out what it was, I'll have to remove the rear engine cover, and what I found I really wasn't expecting. So it turns out the extra cable is for the auto-choking carb system, which I've never seen before on a trimmer. The user has absolutely no control on how the choke works, and I'm still not sure how it's activated or even bypassed. Once I have access to the ends of the cables, I can disconnect them from the carb, and the last thing is to disconnect the wires for the ignition coil so we can completely separate the cover from the engine. Once the cover has been removed, we can try to work the recoil and see if we can find what the issue really is. The only thing that I can tell is that it's kind of slow to rewind, which only proves that the spring is not broken, and to fix it, we just need to put a few more turns on it. To do that, we need to remove this metal plate. Once the plate is gone, we see a really strange and very complicated pulley system. This is apparently how the auto choke system works. It works by using the pulling motion to pull on that extra cable to close the choke on the carb. Now, it's rather ingenious, but at the same time, it's overly complicated for a trimmer, and as you'll see here in a minute, designed to eventually fail. Now, to put a few more turns on the spring, I like to get this assembly out of the way because it's just a bit too close to the recoil pulley. The assembly is really easy to remove. We simply pull it out of the cover along with the return spring. However, this is when we find out there's more going on here than a spring that needs a few more turns. Surprisingly, the rollers for the pulleys are made out of plastic, which spin on plastic posts. Now, to keep things working smoothly, I'm going to remove them and put some lube on them, but this is when I make a terrible discovery. After removing the top plate, I tried to pull one of the rollers off the post, only to realize it was stuck, which is more than likely the reason why the rope didn't want to wind back up on the pulley. This is when I realized the roller was stuck because the rope had burned through it and the post. Now, this is not a good sign, but I think I can make it work. Unfortunately, since this trimmer is very old, I don't think I can find these parts anymore. What I plan on doing is flipping the roller upside down on top of putting some more plastic-safe lithium grease on the post. Once that's done, I'll put the top plate back on and then reinstall the assembly back into the cover for a test pull. I've moved the assembly to the far left so I can test if the rollers are spinning, and I know it's hard to tell, but from my vantage, I can see that both are spinning. I do believe this was the only issue with the pull rope not retracting, so I'm not going to take the spring out. Instead, I'm going to lubricate what I can and then put everything back together. After a few test pulls, it seems to work just fine. However, this is not a permanent fix, and to be honest, I think it's time for an upgrade from this older style of trimmer. My plan is to give it back to them, let them use it for some time until it starts having some issues again. Now, you might be saying that's not good practice to put a bandage on a machine and hope for the best, and I have to agree with you. My only response to that statement is that I'm doing this job for free as a favor, and if he was paying me to fix it, then yes, I would try and fix it the right way. Unfortunately, if that was the case, it wouldn't even get fixed because the parts simply don't exist for this machine anymore. Now, at this point, I'm going to start putting this trimmer back together again. Now, this part is always easy for me, at least in my mind. If you think you might have a problem putting it back together, try taking notes, or better yet, record yourself taking it apart and then just watch the video in reverse to help guide you through it. Now, if I wasn't filming this repair, I would probably redo the fuel lines and service the carb, but since I am filming it, the video would be over 30 minutes long, and that would take about 30 hours to produce, which is something I can't do right now. I know that my videos are typically at a fast pace, but that's the good thing about this platform. If you didn't know it, you can set the video speed all the way down to a quarter speed, or just pause the video when you need to. One of the biggest reasons I don't care for this design is of course where the recoil assembly is located at, which is extremely inconvenient to service. Now, I'm not saying that an easy to service recoil assembly is the deciding factor for me to own and use a trimmer. On the contrary, even though I've had several Echo, Steel, and a few Japanese brands, even an orange brand that starts with a big H, I still prefer a 15-year-old Weed Eater brand Featherlight because it's so easy to use. So what happened to all those better trimmers that I've had? Well, I can't keep all the ones I've fixed, so they've been sold, given away to friends, or handed out to people in need. You won't believe how many people are in desperate need of a free working trimmer, and most are very grateful to get them. Just a quick tip when reassembling any trimmer, just be aware what kind of fastener you're installing into the machine. If you're putting a fastener into metal, more than likely it's going to be a fine thread bolt. However, if you're putting the fastener into a piece of plastic, it's going to be a very coarse thread screw instead. Also, just be careful not to lose any of these fasteners for the machine because if you need to replace a single bolt, it could cost as much as $3. If you don't think that's a rip-off, try going to the hardware store and finding an equivalent universal fasteners, and you'll find it's only around 25 cents. Once you stab the shaft back into the engine, we need to check to make sure the drive shaft is making good contact with the clutch drum. To check if it is, try turning the trimmer head and watch for the clutch drum to spin inside the cover. Now ours is spinning just fine, so I'll start to put all the screws back on. Just be careful not to over tighten them, otherwise you could strip the threads. Now putting the trigger back together on the handle can be kind of tricky, and thankfully I didn't lose this tiny spring, which I kind of forgot it was even there. If you do lose this spring, you might still be able to find this part, as they're fairly universal. Once the trigger is back on, check to make sure it's working like it's supposed to before installing the rest of the handle onto the shaft. Now, if you're in a big hurry, you could use a power tool to reinstall all the fasteners for the handle, but I would recommend not using one. The coarse threads take no time to screw in, and the chances of stripping the plastic is a lot less when putting them in by hand. Once all the screws are back into the handle, check to make sure it's working the throttle plate on the carb. After that, we can finally put some fuel into the carb's throat and replace the cover. Now, I guess I could have tried a test start right now, but I really wanted to put the cover back on first, mainly for a dramatic effect. Once it's back on, we'll try a test start using the fuel I just put into it. Well, the good news is that the engine started and ran for a second, but the bad news is that the rope didn't retract until the engine stopped, which is kind of strange. Now, I do think it's working better than when we first got it, but I don't think it's going to last much longer. However, I'm not going to make that decision for them. Instead, once I give it back to them, it'll be up to them if it'll work for now or if they want to buy a new one instead. So the issue with keeping an old trimmer working is finding the parts for it if you should need it. Now the carb might still be available for it, although it might be very expensive due to supply. However, if you need some obscure part like some plastic rollers for a complicated choke mechanism, you might find yourself out of luck. Another reason why the rope wouldn't wind back into the cover would be a broken spring. The fix is of course to replace it, but as you just saw, that's easier said than done. So my question is, would you have told the owner to buy a new trimmer because the parts aren't available anymore, or would you do what I did, which is to try your best and then let them decide? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.